So Ali, it's so good to manage to grab a quick conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining me via the powers of Zoom. Would you just like to introduce who you are, where you are, a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ali Birkett, and I am up here in the Scottish borders. I'm a tenant farmer on the border, actually farm in England, just on the North Northumberland side, but I live in Scotland. So the farm is on one side of the border and I live on the other side of the border. We're tenant farmers farming an arable farm up here of 550 acres. We don't have our own livestock, but we have livestock on the grass on a seasonal basis through the summer. I've been here now 17 years farming the farm, and it was my father-in-law who was doing so before. As well as farming here, I work part-time for Rural Ministries, a Christian charity that works with rural churches, pioneers, and anybody with a glimmer of an idea to see rural church grow. So that's a little bit about who I am and where I am.
That's fantastic, thank you. And I should say, so I'm Sarah Hulme, for the benefit of people watching, and I'm the Methodist Rural Mission and Ministry Officer. So we're just going to have a bit of a chat, and the hope is that out of this conversation will come maybe some questions and things that you may wish to pause the video on and just discuss with whoever you've got around you or in a small group. And we're not coming at it with any sense of all the answers, but we're part of this environment, this landscape, if you want to call it that, and this way of life. And we just really love for the current realities and some of the issues that are being faced across Britain and more widely across the world, just to be taken into account as we consider harvest this year. And obviously we're pre-recording this, so we really have no idea what things are going to be like in our world come September, October 2022, do we? But from where we are now, at the start of summer 2022, we'll discuss things and we'll see where we get to. So you've already given us a sort of geographical location. Do you want to just try and describe to me what life is like for you in the borders?
Yeah, probably one of the best pictures I could give, Sarah, is something that a story I often tell about our farm that is quite close to my heart, because I think it kind of sums up the big picture of what I want this conversation to be about and the questions I wanted to raise. Because one of our fields is, we farm right next to the River Tweed, which comes right down the border between Scotland and England. The farm, as I say, is on the English side in North Northumberland. And the River Tweed is a good salmon fishing river. And there are people who come right down through our farm on a track that comes all the way down, right down to the river. And the fishermen come down there to enjoy their day of fishing. And where the little fishing hut is, there's a beautiful little shield on the side of the river there. And it's in this one big 50-acre field that's down by the river. We call it the Hoch, which is a bit of flat land next to the river that this beautiful big field is on. And the fishermen come down there and they park their cars, and there's a little hut there, and they sit and have their coffee, and then they go off fishing, and the grass is beautifully cut. And it's a beautiful space between the edge of the field and the river that they enjoy. It's a place where they go to relax and to recreate, enjoy a hobby, and see the beauty of God's creation. So hold that little picture. And we move back from the fishing hut through a 12-meter wide strip of environmental stewardship margin, which is 12 meters of grasses and wildflowers and wonderful clover-rich grasses and wildflowers at this time of year, and their blues and reds and pinks, butterflies and bees and all that kind of wonderful stuff that I want to champion and support as I think about the environment. So you hold that picture as well. We've got the fishing hut, a place of recreation. We've then got this 12-meter environmental strip, which is so important that we look after and steward the planet that God has given us. Then beyond that and into the rest of the field is around about 38, 39 acres of modern arable farming food production. And that's the picture that I see is really important as we try and hold all these things in tension. We can use the land that God has given us to allow people to enjoy and recreate. We have to use the land that God has given us to see sustainable environmental projects going forward. But we also have a moral obligation to produce food for a growing population in our world. And I like to tell that picture and hold that story of that one field along the bottom of the farm that gives some sort of context to arable farming in these modern days in the UK.
But obviously, even that picture is only one tiny bit of what happens for the rest of this country. But how then do you think that connects in more globally as well? Is that something of a sense of you're just in this lovely little bit of North Northumberland, or do you really feel like things impacting you?
Yeah, I think we are. Agriculture is massively exposed to world markets, and I think there are wider questions around getting our heads around globalization. So, for instance, the war in Ukraine, which is currently sadly still going on, big implications for arable farming throughout the world. Yeah. Perhaps the biggest implication is the fact that the Ukrainians themselves aren't able to export the wheat, aren't able to get plantings into the ground for this next season, which, we could well be looking at a food shortage worldwide because available stocks are getting used up quickly. But also because of a lot of fertilizers and other inputs are produced in Eastern Europe, there's ripples there. So input costs have gone up massively. We're all suffering from inflation, but we had a look with an analyst quite recently, and I think there's figures quite widely seen that ag inflation for this last season is around between 30 and 35% inflation on all inputs. Now, commodity prices have gone up, but the volatility is something very difficult to deal with. So we do sometimes get this idyllic picture of this beautiful environmental strip and arable field by the River Tweed, but there are certainly other tensions. Post-Brexit, the support that the Common Agricultural Policy gave us is now being tailed off over the next 5 or 6 years, I think, in all farms in England. There's implications for that as well. Where will future support come from? And again, the jury's out, with some folk in the farming world thinking that the Common Agricultural Policy was failed anyway, that we shouldn't have ever been part of it, but others just seeing it as a loss of income. I'm a tenant farmer. We don't own the land. I'm a tenant farmer. I still have rent to pay. And the bottom line for us is that income from those policies, from the Common Agricultural Policy, is declining away to nothing over the next few years. Doesn't really give us much desire to invest strongly in the business when we don't know what's coming next. Yeah. So it's, often you see all rich farmers and there's never any problem. It's not always like that, for sure.
No. And how are things currently, even just in our country, in terms of rising costs for people going shopping, for example? Do you notice, is that having an impact as well on you as the farmer and the producer, or is it not yet sort of making its way down the chain?
I don't think the impact hasn't made its way down the chain yet from the point of view of rising costs, I don't think. Commodity prices, I have to say this, and our commodity prices, so, we're selling wheat at a lot stronger price than we were 18 months ago. But again, which is great, but it can equally be as volatile the other way. If plantings go up and in 2 years' time we find a world oversupply, it'll come down again. So that volatility is something to get used to. Currently, a lot of the producers are soaking up a lot of the rise in costs. So, for instance, we might sell wheat to a miller or a maltster or something like that. Off it goes to get produced. These guys at the moment are taking a lot of that extra cost as well, because the supermarkets are increasingly pushing their suppliers and taking margins off. I don't want to be completely anti-supermarket. I mean, I go down to our local Tesco, and that's where we buy most of our produce from. But they're powerful. And I think that, you know, rising food costs will happen. There will be inflation. There has to be inflation because there's inflation in the oils and gases that are used to produce a lot of these foods. So yes, I think food costs will go up, and that will be seen on the supermarket shelves before too long.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think it might have an impact on people's diets? I mean, could you see people changing what they buy, what they eat, in terms of just affordability, or do you think that, do you see that happening anyway? Is it changing the market because of people's choices already?
I think people are more and more seeing that what they want to do is they want to eat as cheaply as possible. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, eating as cheaply as possible can lead to not the best nutritional value in the foods that are being purchased. And again, a real tension, Sarah, a real tension, because there are a lot of farmers, Scottish beef farmers, who produce the most beautiful grass-fed beef that goes into the food chain via McDonald's. McDonald's make good burgers. I really enjoy a Big Mac and fries every now and then. But they still do the 99p burger. And because it's so cheap, it's not of best nutritional value if that's all you're having all week. Yet, it's keeping a really good Scottish grass-fed beef farming industry, you know, as are other people. It's keeping that industry going. So there are real tensions. I think there's something around education as well.
Yeah.
So we can go down to Tesco's or Sainsbury's or wherever it is, and we can come back with our asparagus, for instance, and we can say, where did you get that asparagus? I got it from Tesco's. No, actually got it from Peru. Food miles are a big thing. I remember a few years ago, we'd grown some beans at the farm, which were combine harvested and dried. We stored them at the farm for a couple of months. Then they went off in a wagon. They went down to North Northumberland in a wagon. So there was that food miles of, I don't know, 150 miles down there from us, I would think. They were then stored in a big warehouse. They were then put onto a big cargo boat, and they were taken to Egypt. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, that's terrible. Why couldn't my beans be processed and used more locally? Then I thought, actually, every time I go to Tesco's or Sainsbury's or Morrison's, I do the same thing in an opposite way. Yeah. Tomatoes that don't really taste very good that come from Spain, where the labour that's used down there to grow them might not just be so good. And we've got used to having stuff out of season. So I think there's a big education thing to build that connection again between food production and supermarket shelf that's largely been lost. Mm.
And in terms of the seasonal stuff, that's a big adjustment, isn't it? If you are to go to eating local, seasonal, you know, the impacts on then your choices. It's quite a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And the local stuff, there are, you know, around here, as there are in many rural areas, there are some wonderful farm shops with organic produce that's for sale, and it's beautiful, beautiful stuff. But there are a lot of people who simply can't afford to make that choice. And that's a shame, because it's really good food of far stronger nutritional value. Mm. But if it's a purely economic decision, unfortunately, that kind of stuff can't be purchased. So I think, that there's a lot around those everyday choices we make when it comes to buying food from the supermarket shelf,
Yeah.
which is where we largely do it. But I think there is an education issue. I think food has become cheap, not just in the financial sense, but I think it's become cheap as a commodity when we think of food waste. I think it was Tier Fund, in fact, did around about COP26, they did a 6-week series that churches could do. And I remember with a local church to us, my wife and I took part in this conversation. One of the evenings was looking at the way the production of food and food waste particularly. It was said there that for food to be shared out equitably across the whole of our world, we produce enough. If it could be shared out equitably, the Western world would need to consume 3 times less. So each of us, you and I, would need to consume 3 times less. One of those 3 times less was waste, food waste. I found that a shocking statistic. And I think that food has become cheap in the sense of it just being this commodity that will always be there and always just keep on flowing, so we can just keep chucking it out. If we dealt with food waste, we'd be a third of the way there. So education, I think, is important.
Yeah, that's a really good challenge, isn't it? Yeah. And I think we've probably covered quite a lot, have we? I'm trying to think what else there is that we want to say.
I think we have. I just remember things like, I'm going to sound like a typical middle-aged guy now, but I remember years ago when my mum used to serve up the first new potatoes with lashings of butter, which probably isn't good for you either. The first new potatoes of the season, and that was like pure gold. There's nothing beats Scottish soft fruit in season, the strawberries and raspberries that come from Perthshire and Blairgowrie and up into Angus. Absolutely gorgeous. And I think maybe trying to educate ourselves to just enjoy the right food at the right time. It's a little bit like Ecclesiastes 3, and there's a time for everything. Well, maybe there's a time to eat the right kind of food.
Yeah.
But for farming on the ground here, many challenges coming up. Tenant farming, I think, particularly if the land isn't owned, with these payments from Europe coming off, there's still uncertainty about what future support might look like. Trying to attract new entrants into agriculture, but it's very difficult for young people to get tenancies and to have a go. Cost of machinery is rising rapidly. The cost of inputs is rising rapidly. I personally obviously think UK agriculture needs to be valued more highly than it is being currently. Importing food is fine, yet we have seen quite recently that because of the global world we live in, if there is conflict or a falling out and those supply chains from overseas stop, we quickly hit the buffers. So let's go right back to that initial picture of the beautiful countryside and rural environment that God has given us to be a place where people can recreate and enjoy, a place where we care for the environment and have those environmental areas, but also a place where we're producing food in the most efficient way we can. That's the way forward.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been really lovely just to chat with you, Ali, and we really hope that this is a helpful little conversation that might spur some extra conversation between yourselves as you approach harvest this year, trying to be more mindful about people and our planet and the whole wide world in which we live, and just the small part that you and I represent here today. So thank you so much. It's been really much appreciated.
Thank you.